Now we have a submission from the McGuinness Institute and Wendy McGuinness, the Chief Executive of the McGuinness Institute. Tēnā koe, nau mai ki mua I te aroaro o te kamiti taio. Welcome, Wendy. Thank you very much for the McGuinness Institute submission, which is extensive and has quite a lot of high-level debate in it. Would you like to turn on your video? Kia ora.
Cool.
And welcome, and you've got 10 minutes, and I understand you'd like to do a screen share with us as part of your submission. Thank you.
Cool. That's wonderful. Well, look, firstly, thank you very much for your time, and I really, really appreciate it. It's an incredibly important area, and it has long-term standing. Obviously, the last piece of legislation lasted for at least 30 years, which is actually really impressive, and I'm sure that you guys are aiming for at least 30. So I wanted to just go to the Slideshare first, so if that's all right with you, it should be just underneath here. Sorry, but I'm making it very messy. So I'm just going to check you're fine to see all that.
Yes, we can.
Great. Fantastic. And I'll just put it on pay from the start. Right, so you're fine. Always got to check in. So basically, I've probably come with two different purposes. And I think one of the things that really worries me is this broader view of what success looks like. You know, what are we trying to achieve here? What is the purpose? You know, what are the environmental limits? In many ways, the exposure draft is exactly that. It exposes all these different areas and issues. But I think it's really important. I'm going to run through this terribly quickly. It needs to be durable. So we're looking at something that can last 30 years, I'm hoping. So that means that it needs to be really efficient and cost effective. It needs to be really trusted. And in order for it to deliver being timely, cost effective and trusted, it actually needs these really important things like clear processes, decisions based on quality information, decisions that take into account the long term and also risk and uncertainty. And it also needs to be consistent and comparable across the country. I know you know these issues, but when you look at what you've put before us, it's extremely difficult to understand how these things are going to be delivered. And the reason why I wanted to put this slide up is that we are merging into a really chaotic, resource-limited world, and New Zealand is no different. And I'm talking about that in terms of the crises that we face. So it's kind of almost it's not just design a new system and to make it logical and all these things. You've actually got to have the money to deliver on it. Otherwise, you're going to create a lot more chaos. And so the way I sort of see it is the world's just getting noisier and noisier. And so we don't want, you put a complex system on the noise, we're really going to really struggle in New Zealand, and I'm really worried about that. So we just have this little image to just show what this noise looks like. We just finished a big piece of work on COVID, a situational report. Basically, what's happening globally is where we were even 6 weeks ago look better than where we are today in terms of emerging variants and the vaccine issues. So there's a lot of money that's going to have to be spent to deal with these crises. So we just need to be careful what we do. And perhaps the best way I could explain it is if you've got all these other stresses happening, you don't turn around and decide to build a house or, you know, start a business. You know, it's actually a time to reflect and be cautious. It would be reckless to try and do too much at a time when you've got minimal resources. And I mean, I'm aware of public servant in Wellington, obviously, they're all being pulled into the pandemic. The level of fatigue in the public service I've never seen in my whole career. The money is just going out there, you know, which it needs to do. I'm not saying it doesn't, but you need to understand that you're putting such a massively big, complex system, and you're not going to be putting the resources in there to implement it, and it really worries me. So this is another way of talking about this. It's talking about the fat tail distribution. Basically, the risks are getting bigger. So the tail is lifting and it's getting fatter. And unfortunately, it's getting fatter at the bad end. Now, that's bad for Māori. That's bad for every New Zealander. And So we have to be really careful. We want to improve the well-being of New Zealand and make us more robust and anti-fragile and resilient. But we actually have to be careful that we don't, sort of destroy what we've already got because we're just being greedy and over-ambitious in a time when we actually should be reflective and considered. And you're dealing with me. I'm a terribly ambitious person. I'm trying to get across that actually I'm going, whoa, no, this is too much. So I wanted to talk about, then I get into the detail. Now, I found that, and I really understand people would have worked hard on this, but this was a really messy exposure draft. I really struggled with it, and probably I'm old enough to be brave enough to say that I actually thought it was, I didn't really understand it. It wasn't logical. The gaps were terribly concerning for me. I couldn't join the dots. And so I really question whether the quality of consultation that you've got is at the level that you need, given the size of the system you're trying to redesign and reshape. Now, so this is then you go into a bit more detail and you look at the purpose. And I look at the purpose and, I'm not a lawyer, but I understand the importance of hierarchy. Now, so the purpose of the Act is to enable, and we've got this te ranga te ao, which I really like as a concept, but that's first. So the treaty should be first, because the treaty actually brings both partners. It makes us all important. And I find it really terrible that actually I feel terribly excluded on a personal level. Now, I'm a country girl, born in Tikawiti, farming family, stock, hardworking, pretty straight shooter. And this actually removes my ancestors and it removes me from the purpose of the Act. So you don't respect my intrinsic understanding. And I'm a 7-year-old. At 7, I sat on with my father looking out over the farm on a hill in the King Country. You can imagine how many hills there were. And he's saying, we're only stewards. Just make sure you understand that. This is not our land. This is, the land owns us. We don't own the land. And I kind of think that's my intrinsic understanding of the environment. The environment fills me up. When I get exhausted, I go out into the environment. Now that's my intrinsic relationship, and I don't think I'm alone. So for that not to be recognised here, I think is terribly concerning, and I think it's an insult. So saying that, then we get on to the purpose, and I've, which you would have seen, I've actually put some suggestions on how you could just balance it and make it every New Zealander's interest in this legislation, and that everyone has a right to be heard. So I put in to recognise the intrinsic relationships that exist between people, communities, and the environment. I'm not, I think the concept of te ranga te ao is really beautiful, but I think it's a definition and the interpretation. It's given status, I think, beyond what is necessary. I think we've got to try and deal. The environment is bigger than any person or tribe or individual or community or country, or it's massive. So it needs to have that, be centre stage. We have an Environment Act. I'm not sure why you haven't used the Environment Act as the basis for this. That's where the core purposes are. And then, I go on to this, importance of the ecosystem. Is understanding. So you talk about biodiversity in the legislation, and then you break it up into these different, what I would call domains. But actually, the one that doesn't fit there is biodiversity when you go through your list, which you'll know what I'm talking about. But so it's actually, do you know what I mean? You've actually lost what you're trying to achieve here. This is not a new resource management system. This is actually, I think, a really messy platform that is not going to actually make us able to move on very much at all. There's a few things I like, but not much, to be honest. We struggled to find it. I've just put the diagram up. We tried to understand this. In the end, I redrew your diagram to try and understand what you were doing. And then basically I put our proposal, which is not for some reason. Right, so this is basically what I would do. I would separate foresight, strategy and reporting. The reason is, if you don't know me, I'm an accountant, so reporting is terribly important because it actually feeds the system, and we need really good reporting so that we can improve the quality and be very responsive and flexible, particularly to the noisy world. By going back and making the hierarchy in the Environment Act, you actually can put the purpose in there, and it aligns really nicely with the Parliamentary Commission for the Environment work. But you can actually include then a generational plan and a Futures Generations Commissioner. Other countries around the world are doing this, and it's actually, I think, quite slack for us, given our so-called advocacy around climate emergency and all these other issues, and, you know, the Gen Zero, all this kind of narrative that is hitting us, and we're just not putting in place the instruments and institutions to have that dialogue in a comprehensive and well-considered manner. Really like the Public Service Act's long-term insights briefing, incredibly important instrument, the only new instrument that we've had for foresight in many, many years, probably going back to Commission for the Future. The importance of, you know, the Climate Adaptation Act, terribly important, and yet being treated as sort of like a little period at the end of a full, you know, as massive paragraph. And so it actually needs integration. You cannot design systems in the way that this is being proposed with the gaps that you've got. The strategy, I quite like the concept of a National Planning Act. I think that, and putting everything in there, there's a comment that I alluded to in our submission that actually showed that it had been considered by the panel, and maybe the author, I think she's just no longer there, of it, that's on your committee, maybe she would have a view, but I think it was kind of almost shocking that it was not discussed, that option wasn't strategically assessed in the level it should have been. And then, of course, I'm obviously accountant, so I'm Environmental Reporting Act, Financial Reporting Act. These are really important instruments. And look, I'm going to finish there. But, you know, this is our legacy. This is our country. You can't treat it in this ad hoc, silo-based way. You must make space for all New Zealanders in this dialogue. Thank you.
Tēnā koe, Dr. McGuinness. Thank you. If you'd like to stop screen sharing. This is not our draft. Our job as a select committee is an inquiry into a exposure draft that has been produced by government. So it's, thank you for the submission and all of the thought and mahi you've put into it. And Rachel Brooking is still and has been for quite a while. She's deputy chair of the committee and she's on this call. And first question from the Honourable Scott Simpson.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and Wendy, thank you for your very fulsome submission. The written material is very detailed. Wendy, I think you've come as close as any submitter so far, and we've heard now from literally hundreds, I think, to saying that the Emperor wears no clothes. And you're not the first person to have indicated that they're struggling with this jigsaw puzzle for which we only have some of the pieces. In your opinion, would it have helped you and the Institute get your heads around it if you'd had the three pieces of statutory change that are going to make up this suite of changes? I wondered if you could just expand on your thought process around that, please.
So we've been doing submissions for many, many years, and what you try and do is you try and understand what the intent is, and we have a view, or we use the 3 I's. So we're always looking for the institutions, the instruments, and the information. And so when I dive in, that's what I'm looking for, and then I'm trying to understand the linkages between those, I call them the 3 I's. And so what you're trying to do then is actually stress test it in your head. You're trying to say, well, if, you know, where's this picked up, or how does this impact with that, or, you know, does that purpose actually swing through with alignment? So, for example, Local Government Act uses sustainable development. We have the precautionary approach and has no. These understandings, these, you know, comparative legislation is also equally important in understanding how everything aligns together, and that hasn't been looked at. So you've got holes within the framework that's in the exposure draft. And then you've got this lack of disconnect with the legislation that fits around it. And, you know, I'm worried about just the level of fatigue for people to try and actually understand these issues and actually try and develop it. Yeah. So I hate to say it, but it's really the worst I've ever seen. You know, and with respect, Rachel, as an author to the panel, you know, there's just a lack of evidence. So as an accountant, you go in to look at the data. You look to find out where the problems are, and you want to be able to say, right, this part of the system is failing, and we can see that because there's, you know, 90% of resource consents are approved within 4 to 6 weeks. So what's that other 10% looking like? What can we put in that place to actually manage that? It's like there hasn't actually been a bottom-up understanding. So I couldn't find that data. And, you know, I'm good at research. I try and find these stuff. So if you're trying to design a new ecosystem, you actually want to understand what's working and what's not working well. And people use these broad statements to say that RMA is not working, but they don't actually have the evidence to make those statements, I think, in a verifiable way so that you can have a dialogue. And it's just too important. That's my problem with this. This is like so important for the next 30 or 40 years. And we don't want, dare I say with respect, Scott, we don't want another political party coming in and changing it. We want to create a non-partisan approach here. We need this, particularly given where we are right at the moment.
We are running way over time, but I have a quick question from Simon Court.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Wendy. That's a fantastic insight. You mentioned the role of the Environment Act and the relationship that this bill might have to other legislation. Given the need to take a step back, our inquiry will provide a report back to Parliament. What do you think a realistic time frame would be to deliver a comprehensive and enduring reform? Is it 6 months? Is it 12 months? Or are you thinking longer?
I'm aware, so I'm in Wellington, so a lot of my peer group are actually being pulled in to deal with the pandemic. So the people that I really rate are very inquiring, and because other people rate them as well, they've been pulled into that dialogue. So the ability at the moment to actually try and do the level of consultation, and I think Maori were particularly poorly treated in terms of the consultation as well. I mean, I don't think there should be lists at the back of who was consulted with their names, you know. And that's another part of, I suppose, the process that really failed. But yeah, to answer your question really specifically, I mean, I think we're probably 2 years away before I think that we could actually put the resources and have those questions answered. And I was listening to one of the speakers yesterday, and he talked about the problem with, you know, pace and scale and sequencing. And, you know, these are really, you know, I really resonated with me. I don't know about you as a committee, but yeah, I think it's really a time. It's not actually a political response I'm having here. It's just understanding. I've never seen policy analysts so tired. You know, we are a tired country dealing with massive stress, and it would be an elegant response to turn around and say, actually, this is going to suck all the oxygen out of the room, and we can't as a country afford it.
Thank you very much for the submission, and do note that it's an exposure draft, which isn't a usual process with legislation, so it is trying to set out the core of what would be the legislation, so it's an additional step.
Yeah. And one super, I'm not a doctor. I actually tried to do a PhD 2 or 3 times, but I ended up having children instead.
My apologies. Thank you very much for the submission and all of the mahi that's gone into it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ka nui te mihi.